Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try and help slow your spinning mind enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you drift away. But before you fall asleep, if you do find Sleepy Time Tales helpful, and you would like to help me keep it going out to you and your fellow insomniacs, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. If monthly is a bit much, you can put a tip in the tip jar, and both of these options are linked in the show notes. Or you can support Sleepy Time Tales by just spreading the word. If you know someone else who is struggling to sleep, just tell them about Sleepy Time Tales and maybe they'll find it helpful. So let's move on to tonight's reading, where we are going to start out by learning about the wood pigeon, and then learn about a whole bunch of other delightful little birds. So snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. We return this week to Birds in Their Nests by Mary Howitt. Besides man, the wood pigeon has its own bird enemies. In districts where the hooded crow abounds, says the author, whom I have just quoted, he is always on the lookout for its eggs, which, shining out white from the shallow, unsubstantial nest, are easily seen by him. The sparrowhawk seizes the young when they are half-grown and plump, he having been carefully noticed watching the nest day by day, as if waiting for the time when they should be fit for his eating. The larger hawks, however, prey on the poor wood pigeon himself. With all his pleasant cooings in the wood, therefore, and all his complacent strutting about with elevated head and protruded breast, with all his gambols and graces, his striking the points of his wings together as he rises into the air, to express a pleasure to his mate beyond his cooing, he has not such a carefree life of it. He is always kept on the alert, therefore, and, being always on the watch against danger, is not at all a sound sleeper. The least disturbance at night rouses him. I have frequently, continues our author, attempted to approach the trees when the wood pigeons were roosting, but even on the darkest nights they would take alarm. The poor wood pigeon has no other defense against his enemies than its ever-watchful, never-sleeping timidity, not being able to do battle against even the smallest of its many persecutors. Gilbert White says that the wood pigeons were greatly decreasing in his time in Hampshire, and there were then only about 100 in the woods at Selborne. But in former times the flocks had been so vast, not only there, but in the surrounding districts, that they traversed the air morning and evening like rooks, reaching out for a mile together, and that when they thus came to rendezvous there by the thousands, the sound of their wings, suddenly roused from their roosting trees in an evening, rising all at once into the air, was like a sudden rolling of distant thunder. Although the wood pigeon is considered to be the original parent of the tame pigeon, yet it does not seem possible to tame the young of this bird, though taken from the nest quite young. It is a bird which appears to hate confinement, and as soon as it has the opportunity, spite of all kindness and attention, it flies away to the freedom of the woods. Chapter 17. The Whitethroat. With none of our migratory birds, our spring visitants from southern lands, is the lover of the country more familiar than with the whitethroat, which with its nest is here so beautifully and livingly depicted by Mr. Harrison Weir. This bird, with its many names, whitethroat, Peggy Whitethroat, Peggy Chaw, Charlie Mufti, Nettle Creeper, Wishy Wee Beard, or Pettichamp, comes to us in April, about the same time as the cuckoo and the swallow. The male bird, like his cousin the nightingale, coming before the female. But he does not make himself very conspicuous till the hedges and bushes are well covered with leaves. Then he may be found in almost every lane and hedge the whole country over. As soon as the female is here and the birds have paired, the business of nest building begins, and they may then be seen flying in and out of the bushes with great alertness. The he-bird caroling his light and airy song, and often hurling himself, as it were, up into the air some 20 or 30 feet, in a wild, tipsy sort of way, as if he were fuller of life than he could hold, and coming down again with a warble into the hedge, where the little henwife is already arranging her dwelling, in the very spot probably where she was herself hatched, and her ancestors before her for ages. For I must here remark that one of the most remarkable properties of birds is that facility by which they so regularly disperse themselves over the whole country on their arrival, after their far migration, each one, in all probability, attracted by some attachment of the past, stopping short at, or proceeding onward to, the exact spot where he himself first came into the consciousness of life. This is one of the wonderful arrangements of nature, otherwise of God, by which the great balance is so beautifully kept in creation. If the migratory bird arrives ever so weary at Dover, and its true home be some sweet low-lying lane of Devonshire, a thick hedgerow of the Midland counties, or a thickety glen of Westmoreland, it will not delay its flight, nor be tempted to tarry short of that glen, hedgerow, or lane, with which the experience of its own life and affection is united. At this charming time of the year, none of the various performers in nature's great concert bring back to those who have passed their youth in the country a more delicious recollection of vernal fields and lanes than this bird of ours, the little white-throat. Yes, along those hedges fresh and fragrant with their young leaves, along those banks studded with primroses, campions, bluebells, and white starwort, and through the thick growth of the wild rose bushes, all of which have a beauty especially their own, the white-throat salutes you as you pass, as if to recognize an old acquaintance. He is brimful of fun. Out he starts and performs his series of eccentric frolics in the air, accompanied by his madcap sort of warble. Or, almost as if laughing at you, he repeats from the interior of the bushes his deep grave note, chaw, chaw, whence comes the name of Peggy Chaw. This, however, is to tell you, and to those who understand bird language it is intelligible enough, that he now has a family to attend to, and he begs very respectfully that you will not trouble yourself about it. A Scotch naturalist says that the peasant boys in East Lothian imagine that the bird is mocking or laughing at them as it tumbles over the hedge and bushes in the lane, and therefore they persecute it at all times, even more mercilessly than they do sparrows. The white-throat is an excitable little bird, rapid in all its movements, and though it will apparently allow a person to come near, it incessantly flits on, gets to the other side of the hedge, warbles its quaint little song, flies to a short distance, sings again, and so on, for a long time, returning in the same way. It erects the feathers of its head when excited and swells its throat so much when singing that the feathers stand out like a ruff, whence it has obtained the name of Muffety, or Charlie Mufti in Scotland. Its colour on the upper parts of the body is reddish-brown, brownish-white below, with a purely white throat. Its food is principally insects and larvae of various kinds, for which it is always on the search amongst the thick undergrowth of the plants and bushes where it builds. One of its many names is nettle creeper, from this plant growing so generally in the localities which it haunts. Its nest, one of the most light and elegant of these little abodes, may be truly called gauze-like, for being constructed wholly of fine grasses and very much of the brittle stems of the galnum, aperine, or cleavers, which though slender are not blind, and bend only with an angle, They prevent the whole fabric from being closely woven, so that it maintains a gauzy texture. The inside, however, is put together more closely of finer and more pliant materials, delicate root filaments and various kinds of hair. The eggs, 4 or 5 in number, are of a greenish-grey color, often with a tawny hue, blotched and spotted over with dark tints of the same color. A correspondent of the author of British Birds says that one morning in June, when walking in a shrubbery within about 80 yards of a whitethroat's nest, which he was taking great interest in, he found a portion of the shell of one of the eggs of this bird, and fearing that a magpie had been plundering it, hastened to the spot, but found to his satisfaction that the nest was then full of newly hatched birds. The shell had, he said, been instinctively taken away by the mother in order to prevent the discovery of the place of her retreat. He adds that the mother bird was very shy and usually dropped from her nest with the most astonishing rapidity, and treading her way through the grasses and other entanglements, disappeared in a moment. The young, too, seemed greatly to dislike observation, and on his taking one into his hand to examine it, it uttered a cry, no doubt of alarm, on which all the other little things leapt out of their abode, although not more than half-fledged, and hopped amongst the grass. It is a singular fact that almost every kind of young bird, if they be caused to leave their nest through alarm or by being handled, can never be induced to stay in the nest again, though they may be put back into it time after time. Chapter 18. The Bullfinch. This bird, which is common to all parts of the country, is very shy, and for the greater part of the year haunts the woods and thickets. In spring, however, its fondness for tender fruit buds tempts it into gardens and orchards, where, being considered an enemy, it is destroyed without mercy. It is a question, however, whether it devours these young buds as a favorite food, or whether it may not be the equally distinctive grub or insect which is the temptation, and thus it ought rather to be regarded as the friend than the enemy of the gardener and fruit grower. At all events, the general opinion is against the poor bullfinch. He is declared to be a devourer of the embryo fruit, and no mercy is shown to him. The Reverend J.G. Wood, always a merciful judge where birds are concerned, thinks that public opinion is unfairly against him. He says that a gooseberry tree, from which it was supposed that the bullfinches had picked away every blossom bud, yet bore the same year an abundant crop of fruit, which certainly proved that they had picked away only the already infected buds, and so left the tree in an additionally healthy state, doubly able to mature and perfect its fruit. Bullfinches seldom associate with other birds, but keep together in small flocks as of single families. Its flight, though quick, is somewhat undulating or wavering, and in the winter it may sometimes be seen in large numbers flitting along the roadsides and hedges, being probably forced out of some of its shyness by the stress of hunger. Its ordinary note is a soft and plaintive whistle, its song short and mellow. It is in its native state no way distinguished as a singing bird, but at the same time it is possessed of a remarkable faculty for learning tunes artificially, of which I may have more to say presently. The bullfinch begins to build about the beginning of May. She places her nest, as we see in our illustration, in a bush, frequently a hawthorn, at no great distance from the ground. The nest is not very solidly put together, the foundation, so to speak, being composed of small dry twigs, then finished off with fibrous roots and moss, which also form the lining. The eggs, 5 or 6 in number, of a dull bluish white, marked at the larger end with dark spots. Although there is so little to say about the bullfinch in his natural state, excepting that he is a handsome bird, with bright black eyes, a sort of rich black hood on his head, his back ash-grey, his breast and underparts red, wings and tail black, with the upper tail coverts white. Yet when he has gone through his musical education, he is not only one of the most accomplished of songbirds, but one of the most loving and faithfully attached little creatures that can come under human care. These trained birds are known as piping bullfinches. Bishop Stanley, in his History of Birds, thus describes the method by which they are taught. In the month of June, the young ones, which are taken from the nest for the purpose, are brought up by a person who, by care and attention, so completely tames them that they become perfectly docile and obedient. At the expiration of about a couple of months, they first begin to whistle, from which time their education begins, and no more school can be more diligently superintended by its master, and no scholars more effectually trained to their own calling than a seminary of bullfinches. They are formed first into classes of about 6 in each, and having been kept a longer time than usual without food and confined to a dark room, the tune they are to learn is played over and over again on a little instrument called a bird organ, the notes of which resemble, as nearly as possible, those of the bullfinch. Sometimes also a flageolet is used for the purpose, and birds so taught are said to have finer notes. For a while the little moping creatures will sit in silence, not knowing what all this can mean, but after a while, one by one, will begin to imitate the notes they hear, for they have great power of imitation as well as remarkably good memories. As soon as they have said their lesson all round, light is admitted into the room and they are fed. By degrees the sound of the musical instrument, be it flageolet or bird organ, and the circumstance of being fed, becomes so associated in the mind of the hungry bird that it is sure to begin piping the tune as soon as it hears it begin to play. When the little scholars have advanced so far, they are put into a higher class, that is to say, are turned over each to his private tutor. In other words, each bird is put under the care of a boy who must carry on its education, and who plays on the little instrument from morning to night, or as long as the bird can pay attention, during which time the headmaster, or feeder, goes his regular rounds, scolding or rewarding the little feathered scholars by signs and modes of making them understand, till they have learnt their lessons so perfectly, and the tune is so impressed on their memories that they will pipe it to the end of their days. And let us hope, as I believe is the fact, that they find in it a never-ending delight. Just as in human schools and colleges, it is only the few out of the great number who take the highest honors or degrees, or become senior wranglers. So it is not above 5 birds in every 100 who can attain to the highest perfection in their art, but all such are valued at a very high price. It is allowable to hope that the poor bullfinch, which has thus industriously applied himself to learn, and has thus become artificially gifted with the power of pleasing, takes great satisfaction in his accomplishment. Perhaps also the association with his human teacher calls forth his affection, as well as his power of song. For it is a fact that the piping bullfinch is, of all birds, given to attach itself to some one individual of the family where it is kept, expressing, at their approach, the most vehement delight, greeting them with its piping melody, hopping towards them, and practicing all its winning ways to show its love and to court a return of caresses. An interesting story, says the bishop, was told by Sir William Parsons, who was himself a great musician, and who, when a young man, possessed a piping bullfinch which he had taught to sing, God Save the King. On his once going abroad, he gave his favourite in charge to his sister, with a strict injunction to take the greatest care of it. On his return, one of his first visits was to her, when she told him that the poor little bird had been long in declining health, and was at that moment very ill. Sir William, full of sorrow, went into the room where the bird was, and opening the door, put in his hand and spoke to the bird. The poor little creature recognized his voice, opened his eyes, shook his feathers, and staggered onto his finger, piped God Save the King, and fell down dead. We see in the piping bullfinch a bird which in its education is closely associated with man, the deep and devoted affection of which it is capable. And if we could only live with the animal creation as their friends and benefactors, we should no longer be surprised by such instances of their intelligence and love. Chapter 19. The Missel Thrush. This is the largest of our British songbirds. It remains with us through the whole year, not being migratory, except insofar as it moves off in considerable flocks into Herefordshire and Monmouthshire, for the sake of the mistletoe which abounds in the orchards there, on the viscous berries of which it delights to feed, and whence it has obtained its familiar name of missel, or mistletoe thrush. It is generally believed that this curious parasitic plant was propagated or planted upon the branches of trees by this bird rubbing its bill upon the rough bark, to clean it from the sticky substance of the berry, and thus introducing the seeds into the interstices of the bark. The missel thrush is a handsome bird. The head, back, and upper coverts of the wings olive brown, the latter tipped with brownish white, spotted with brown. The legs and underparts pale yellow, covered with black spots. The legs are yellow and the claws black. It is a welcome bird, being the earliest harbinger of spring, the first singer of the year. Long before the swallow is thought of, before even the hardy familiar robin has begun his song, its clear rich voice may be heard on Christmas or New Year's Day, often amidst wild winds and winterly storms, whence its also familiar name, the stormcock. It is known by different names in different parts of the country. The origin of its more general appellation, the missel thrush, I have already mentioned. In the Midland counties it is called the thrushcock, but why I know not. In Wales it is known as penny Elwyn, which means the head or master of the coppice. Why it is so called I will mention presently. The nest of the missel thrush is large and well constructed, being made of almost every material ordinarily used for nest-making purposes. Moss and hay and straw and dry leaves and little twigs and locks of wool, with occasional odds and ends of every possible kind. All these are woven and wrought together very compactly, not, however, without loose straws and little tangles of wool hanging about. Within is a smooth casing of mud, as in the nest of the throstle, and within that a second coating of dry grass. Our picture represents all as being now complete. The busy labors of the year are now over. The eggs, 4 or 5 in number, of a greenish hue, marked with reddish spots, are laid, and the mother bird has taken her patient seat upon them, whilst her mate, from the branch above, sings as if he never meant to leave off again. The song of this bird is loud, clear, and melodious, a cheering, hopeful song, and when heard amid the yet prevailing winter storms, as if in anticipation of better times, it well deserves our admiration. It resembles to a certain degree the song of the blackbird and the thrush, and is often mistaken for them. But it has not the short, quick, and varied notes of the one, nor the sober, prolonged, and eloquent melody of the other. On the contrary, it is of an eager, hurrying character, as if it could not sufficiently express its emotion, and yet was trying to do so. The missel thrush is a bird of very marked character, and is both bold and chivalrous. Its harsh, jarring note of anger and defiance is the first to be heard when a bird enemy is at hand. If a cuckoo or hawk is anywhere near meditating mischief, the missel thrush is vehement in his expression of displeasure. In our own neighborhood, where the jays in summer come from the wood to carry the young of the sparrows from their nests in the ivied boles of the trees round our garden, the outcry of the parent sparrows instantly arouses the sympathetic missel thrushes, who, with a scolding defiance, rush to the rescue. Of course, these birds, which are of so militant a character and so loud in protesting against a wrong done to another, will be equally alive to their own rights, and active in defending their own nests and young. Some naturalists have suggested that this combatant temper and extraordinary courage are but the natural consequences of the bird finding its nest open to common attack. For being of a large size and built early in the year, whilst the trees are yet leafless, it is visible to every enemy and predator. Mr. Thompson says, often have I seen a pair of these birds driving off magpies, and occasionally fighting against 4 of them. One pair which I knew attacked a kestrel which appeared in their neighborhood when the young were out. One of them struck the hawk several times, and made as many more fruitless attempts as the enemy, by suddenly rising in the air, escaped the cunning blow. They then followed the kestrel for a long way until they were lost to our sight in the distance. The old Welsh name of Master or Head of the Coppice refers to the same warlike spirit. The mistle thrush, says Gilbert White, suffers no magpie, jay, or blackbird to enter the garden where he haunts, and is for the time a good guardian of the new-sown crops. In general, he is very successful in defense of his family. Once, however, I observed in my garden that several magpies came determined to storm the nest of the mistle thrush. The parent birds defended their mansion with great vigor, and fought resolutely, but numbers at last prevailed, and the poor mistle thrushes had the pain of seeing their nest torn to pieces and their young carried off. The mistle thrushes, however, as the year goes on, make for themselves enemies even more formidable than hawks or magpies. These are the gardeners. Towards the end of summer, when the young have flown, and they and the parent birds congregate in large flocks, having then nothing to do but enjoy themselves, like human families, when children are all home for the holidays, they too go abroad on their excursions of pleasure, not however to seaside watering places, but into gardens where the cherries and raspberries are ripe. Poor birds, little aware of their danger, or if they be so, defiant of it in the greatnesses of the temptation, they make sad havoc amongst the fruit, and many unfortunates are shot or snared. It is a pity we cannot make them welcome to some, and yet have enough left for ourselves. The berries of mountain ash and arbutus, and later on in the year those of holly and ivy, supply them with food, as do also in the spring and summer insects of various kinds, caterpillars and spiders, so that in this respect they are good friends to the gardener, and might, one thinks, be made welcome to little fruit in return. Chapter 20. The yellowhammer, or yellowhead. This, though an extremely pretty bird, is so common that very little notice is taken of it. Its colors are varied and beautiful, the back and wings bright red, the central part of each feather brownish-black, the head and throat bright yellow, the feathers of the upper part tipped with black, the breast brownish-red. The colors of the female are much duller. The yellowhammer resembles linnets, finches, and sparrows in character and habits, and often associates with them, resorting to the fields in open weather and often perching in hedges and bushes as well as in trees. In the winter, when the weather is severe, it congregates with other birds about houses, farm buildings, and stackyards. One of the most pleasing features of autumn is, to my mind, these flocks of kindred birds, which are at that time all abroad and yet together, circling in their flight, or rising as you approach and wheeling away into the stubble field, or into the distant hedges, now rich with their wild fruits. The blackberry, the wild rosehip, and the bunches of black privet berries, and then away again as you approach, with their variously modulated notes, through the clear air into the yet more distant stubble or bean field. The flight of the yellowhammer is wavy and graceful, and alighting abruptly, he has a curious way of jerking out his tail feathers like a little fan. All at once the whole flock of them will descend from a considerable height, and settle on the twigs of a tree, clothing it as with living leaves. Whatever number the flock may consist of, there is no impatient hurry or jostling among them to get the best perch, every individual settling as if on its own appointed place. As I have already observed, nothing is more charming at this season than these congregated companies of small birds. All the cares of life are now over. The young broods are around them, and now with nothing to do but enjoy themselves in the freedom of nature, where on every hand, on every bush and tree, and in every outlying field, though the crops are not carried, all except perhaps here and there a solitary field in which the bean shocks stand up black in the golden autumnal sunshine. But here and there and everywhere, a full table is spread, and they are welcome to enjoy. In spring and summer, the yellowhammer sings a peculiar but mournful sort of little ditty, composed of a few short sonorous notes, concluding with one long drawn out. In the Midland counties, where stock weaving is the business of the people, the note of the bird is said to resemble the working of the machine. Ch-ch-ch-ch-e-e-chay. The prolonged latter syllable being what the stockinger calls, in the machine movement, pressing over the arch. In other parts of the country, this bird's song is interpreted as a little bit of bread and no cheese, which may just as well be a little bird am I, and no thief. The food of this bird consists of the seeds of all kinds of grasses, chickweeds, polygonums, and other such weeds. Also in summer, when food is needed for the young, insects and larvae. The winter congregations break up in April, and then the yellowhammer begins to think of family joys and cares. But unlike their relations, the sparrows and finches, the he-birds take everything quietly, without having their little skirmishes to show their spirit and prowess like the knights of old at the tournament, before their admiring ladies. The yellowhammer does everything quietly, choosing his mate in an orderly way. And now that the buds are swelling on the trees, the primroses gemming at the hedge banks, and the golden catkins hanging on the willows by the watersides, hither come the little yellowhammers. And, having selected some sweet hidden spot, under a bush or on the fieldy banks amongst the thick herbage, we see it a month later in our picture when the buds have expanded into leaves, in a wild growth of beautiful grasses and herbage, begin to make their nest. How picturesque it is. William Hunt never painted anything more beautiful. The nest itself is somewhat large and of simple construction, woven externally of coarse bents and small pliant twigs, and lined with hair and wool. Here the hen lays 4 or 5 eggs of a purplish white, marked with dark irregular streaks, often resembling musical notes. These poor little birds are extremely attached to their home and their young, so much so that if these be taken by the pitiless bird nester, they will continue for some days about the place, uttering the most melancholy plaint, which, though still to the same old tune as the song of their spring rejoicing, has now the expression of the deepest woe. The author of British Birds thus sums up their various characteristic actions. When perched on a tree, especially in windy weather, they crouch close to the twigs, draw in their necks and keep their tails declined. After pairing, the male is generally seen on a bush or tree, raising his tail by sudden jerks and slightly expanding it. His notes are then usually 2 chirps, followed by a harsher note, chir-chir-chir, with considerable intervals. When fielding in stubble fields, they advance by very short leaps, with their breasts nearly touching the ground. When apprehensive of danger, they crouch motionless, and when alarmed, give information to each other by means of their ordinary short note. Chapter 21. The Magpie. You have here a living portrait of the magpie, sitting, so to speak, on his own dorsal, and contemplating it with rather a sentimental air, perhaps rather with tender admiration. And as to his dwelling, it is, we must confess, a wonderful structure. A half-timbered edifice, so to speak, walled round and roofed in, with its front door and all complete. The magpie is one of our most beautiful, as well as most amusing and characteristic birds. He is cousin to the jackdaw and has, like him, odd ways of his own. In all countries where he is found, he is just the same. An old Greek poet, who lived 2,000 years ago, speaks of him as a great mimic, and such an inordinate talker that in his own satirical humor, he pretends to believe that magpies were originally a family of young ladies in Macedonia, who were noted for their volubility of their tongues. Handsome he is, as well as talkative, and very droll and mischievous. Being such, we need not wonder that his nest is very original. He likes to place it in a secure angle of branches, on some lofty tree as we see it here, 50 feet or so from the ground, and prefers to have it on a tree bare of branches to a considerable height, knowing then that it is more inaccessible. He is wise for all this, for its bulk being so large it is discernible to a great distance. As magpies, however, are found almost everywhere, and in some parts of the country, the north of Scotland, for instance, where there are no trees, the poor magpie is then obliged to build in a bush and do the best he can. In such a case, as in Norway, he was known to barricade his nest with thorny branches, brought thither by himself for that purpose, so that it was next to impossible for the domicile to be invaded. A cat could not get to it, and a man only with hedging mittens on his hands and by the help of a bullhook. And I think I'm going to leave it there. As always, if you'd like to find the original, you can get it on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.